Hey everybody, this PowerPoint, continuing with the Clashing Cultures theme, is going to be a very quick overview of the Scopes trial in Tennessee in 1925 that you've read about in Eric Foner's book. And there's just a few things about this I want to reiterate along with what Foner says about it in the section that you read. So let's get started. So here's John Scopes, whom you read about in Eric Foner's book, teacher in the Rhea County Public High School in the little town of Dayton, Tennessee, located between Chattanooga and Knoxville in the eastern part of the state. And Scopes had primarily been hired to be the football coach, but also substituted for other teachers. And he was substituting for a science teacher when he did a lesson plan that incorporated a unit in Charles Darwin's theories of evolution. Now, what a lot of people don't understand about this even today is that Scopes had agreed to do this. The state of Tennessee was one of several states that had laws that literally prohibited the teaching of evolution in public schools, and instead teachers in science class were supposed to teach biblical, Bible-based creationism. Scopes, being the football coach, was pretty well known in the small town of Dayton. Football was a big deal there. He frequently socialized at the drugstore soda fountain in downtown with businessmen, small business owners in Dayton. Dayton's kind of interesting in that although it was a smaller southern town, it really prided itself on being somewhat progressive. The Klan had never really been a big presence there. And there were a group of businessmen in discussions with Scopes who said that they thought this law should be challenged. And so Scopes agreed to do so, and that's why he used this lesson plan, which interestingly was in a science textbook that had been approved by the state of Tennessee, even though it had a unit on evolution, which under Tennessee law, teachers were prohibited from teaching in class. So kind of a complicated situation, but Scopes knew what he was getting into and agreed to serve as kind of a test case to challenge this law. So this trial became a huge story. National coverage in newspapers across the United States. It was carried live in radio. You see the courthouse picture in the left, the small town in Dayton, Tennessee. Clarence Darrow, who was the most famous criminal defense attorney of this era, offered to defend Scopes and came in while the state called as an expert witness William Jennings Bryan, who was older, in poor health. Bryan had been a Secretary of State during the administration of Woodrow Wilson. He had been a politician before that who had run unsuccessfully for the presidency 4 times. He was very much a populist, and he was also a deeply religious person who took the Bible literally and believed everything in the Bible was literally true. Darrow was an agnostic, meaning, just to differentiate an agnostic from an atheist would say, I don't believe there is a God. I don't believe in the concept of God. An agnostic would argue that they're open to the possibility of there being a God, but they haven't seen enough evidence to convince them of that fact. And that's where Darrow was. But he knew the Bible well. He couldn't stand Bryan. You see this picture of them together. And he was determined to get Bryan on the stand, cross-examine him, and make him look foolish, which he did. And this was the basis of a play you may have seen, which was subsequently filmed as a movie a couple decades later, Inherit the Wind. And while a lot of people remember this, it really didn't have much impact on the trial itself. and what happened, because Darrow was not in the courtroom on a daily basis doing the day-to-day work of defending Scopes. That fell to a different attorney, whom I'm going to talk about in the next slide. Here you see a young attorney, Dudley Malone, who worked for a law firm in New York City, but he also did pro bono, that is, free work for the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. And Malone had been interested in this case from the beginning. He was a talented young lawyer, volunteered his services to the ACLU, and he's the person, although Darrow was the one who got the headlines and a lot of the media attention, Malone was the one who did the day-to-day work in court and made the famous closing argument that you're going to read a portion of and we'll talk about briefly in class. And it was a closing argument in which Malone said that these two things didn't have to be incompatible, that is, science and religion, that a person could retain their faith and still accept scientific teaching. And his argument centered on the fact that children all over the world in advanced countries were learning Darwin's theories of evolutions, and American children were being ill-served by being denied exposure to these scientific concepts and ideas. So his argument is no one's, asking you to renounce or cast aside your religious beliefs, but we are arguing that American kids have a right in public school to learn scientific method, science-based teaching, and Malone felt that biblical-based creationism, that sort of teaching was better suited for a Sunday school class, not a public school. So on the one level, this trial is about teaching evolution, about science versus religion. But the fact that it generated such broad interest indicates that it touched a nerve in a much bigger way with Americans. And it's another example of this cultural divide that I've emphasized in the 1920s, with some Americans feeling that changes like teaching evolution in public schools were somehow changing fundamental values, at least posing a threat to them. Malone's argument is an attempt to say, no, that's not the case. But again, the publicity and interest surrounding this trial reflects the fact that it touched on a variety of broader concerns that many Americans had.